Welcome to Boroughs Burbs with hosts John Engel and Roberto Cabrera. Over the next hour, you're going to learn some insider knowledge that will help you overcome and strategize in the cutthroat world of real estate. Now, here are your hosts, John and Roberto.
Welcome, everybody. Episode 101 of Boroughs Burbs, exploring the big impact of the small town newspaper. This week on the show, we have Peter Barhydt, editor-in-chief of the Greenwich Sentinel, and soon to be the new Canaan Sentinel, the local newspaper for Greenwich, Connecticut. And we have Mark Pruner, author of the Sentinel's wildly successful real estate column and his real estate reports, must read in Greenwich, Connecticut. Wait, did he say newspaper? I thought newspapers were a thing of the past. Apparently not in Greenwich, and that's what we want to know today. What is the secret formula that they've got down in Greenwich that we all need to know about? But before we get to our show, I want to thank our special guest, Grace Farms. You'll find them at gracefarms.org, and their effort, which is, I want to talk about Grace Farms Food. gracefarmsfood.org. You can go there and you can get their drips and you can get their sips. That's the cute name for their coffee and their tea. They make a great closing gift. I recommend you could either buy it at the local Walter Stewart's or in some of the local stores, or you can go up to Grace Farms and sit with Frank in the tea house, sample all the teas, and then pick the ones you like. So check out gracefarmfoods.org and go visit Grace Farms. Now, without further ado, let me introduce again Mark Pruner. Wave for us, Mark. And Peter Barhydt. Peter Barhydt, tell me about the Greenwich Sentinel and why it's important.
The Greenwich Sentinel, my wife is the publisher. It's a women-owned business. We're very proud of that fact. She decided about 8 years ago that she wanted to do something to try and bring the Greenwich community closer together. And she believes in putting her money where her mouth is. And so she came up with the idea of starting a local community newspaper, weekly community newspaper. We had one previously in Greenwich, but it had closed. And so there was just one paper in town and it was a little lopsided. And so we approached news differently. We do not believe in the expression, if it bleeds, it leads. When we started the newspaper, we went to our chief of police in Greenwich and asked him if he thought there was value in having a police blotter in the paper. And he said, no, it's nothing but a gossip column. And we don't approach every news story by how it divides the community, but rather how the community can benefit from it.
And what is the circulation? How influential is the paper in a town of 63,000 people?
So the paper distribution is fascinating. We want to deliver the content to individuals whichever way they want to receive it. So to date, we have 3,000 paid home delivery subscriptions. Which are print papers. We have 3,000 print newsstand copies, which people can pick up at gas stations and newsstands. And then we have 22,000 people that have signed up to receive it digitally. And so the print paper gets turned into a digital version, which is an exact replica with the exception of all the advertisements hot linked back to the advertiser's website. And that goes out to 22,000 people each week. Interestingly, 20% of that 22,000 is in Westchester.
Wow.
So
it's a relatively new endeavor. I mean, 8 years, just by the name, I was like, this has been around for 50 years.
Thank you.
It's impressive.
We're having a lot of fun with it. And we're very excited about coming into New Canaan. We have been working on New Canaan for about a year quietly. And the response that we have received with individuals that we've met with and businesses that we've met with has been overwhelmingly positive and encouraging.
So you're incorporating that under the same name?
So it will be a New Canaan Sentinel.
Okay.
And it comes out weekly.
It'll come out weekly on Fridays.
What are the major sections of the Greenwich Sentinel that you'll be introducing in New Canaan? What are the main columns or sections that we're going to see every week?
Great question. The objective for the Greenwich Sentinel is that an individual can read it cover to cover and know everything that's happening in Greenwich that week without any editorializing or skipping over various aspects of stories. And so what we have are news briefs, which start on the front page, much like the Wall Street Journal does in the left-hand column. And then they continue inside. And those are just short little, this is what happened at this meeting at town hall, or in New Canaan, it may be, we had a black bear wandering around our woods this past week.
Black bears are always big stories here in New Canaan. You see
Yep.
a black bear and that leads. Yep.
So as you go through the paper, we have a strong worship section where we list every church and all of their services as a community service. We have, we present obituaries. We don't charge for obituaries. We also have a weekly column by one of the houses of worship, which goes on a rotating basis. And I believe Father Rob at St. Aloysius is going to be our first one in New Canaan. And of course, with Mark on the phone, the most read part of the paper is the real estate section.
That surprises me. So I want to find out, let's now turn our attention to Mark. Mark, you've been writing the column for the real estate column for the Sentinel for how long?
I think 6 years or so, 7 years. There was a woman who had started it out, and her second column, she was the head of one of the agencies. She called up and said, "Can you help me with some facts?" The third column, she said, "Would you mind, just writing this part of it?" And the fourth one I wrote, and I've been writing it ever since for I guess since around 2017, 18.
All right, I'm going to ask you a rather pointed question now, right?
Mhm.
There's 800, I think 850 realtors in Greenwich. How many of them are aggravated that you get to write the column?
Actually, surprisingly, I have asked people to write guest columns, and it's actually a tough recruit because each column, the stats take about an hour and a half to 2 hours. The column itself takes about 3 hours. And it's just tough to find people who will commit regularly. Carlene Martin writes I write 3 out of the 4 weeks in a month. She writes the fourth column, which is more of an FAQ question and answer thing. But it's tough. I will say, I've heard from Beth, though, if I talk a little bit too much about what's going on at my firm, we get pushback from the other firms that are advertising in the paper. But I really don't get much pushback on the stuff I write. I often get folks saying, "Gee, I'm glad you said that and not me."
Mark,
So-
has it been good for business?
It's been very good for business, which, as I said, it takes about 5 hours a week to do, and I wouldn't be spending that time if it didn't generate good leads. And I get contacted regularly by people who said, I've been reading your column for years, and we're thinking about selling our house. Could you come over? And then the other thing is, when I do go in for a presentation, it just validates you as somebody who knows what's going on in the market. When you have, hundreds of other agents.
And what is it that people want to see in the paper? It's got to be more than just stats, what came on and what sold, and how we're doing versus this time last year. It's got to be more than that.
So it's, a lot of real estate articles are what I call the Carrera Marble article. And it says, the 8-foot grand door is open to the Carrera Marble lobby, and then proceeds to describe the house for the next, 26 paragraphs. I zone out after the first 4 sentences on that. And then on the other side, you have people who just give you raw numbers. This is how many listings, this is how many houses. And what I try to do is go behind the numbers and see what's driving the market and see how things are changing. I remember growing up here when I was a kid. One of the things that my parents and everybody else talked about in Greenwich was real estate. It's something that people are always interested in because with a median price of $2.5 million, People have a fair amount of money invested in it. They're always interested in how their neighborhood is doing. I've been doing a long-running contest between Riverside and Old Greenwich. Now, these parts of Greenwich are so similar that nobody can tell the difference, but there is a dividing line, and some years Old Greenwich is doing better than Riverside and vice versa. So, you make up interesting ways to take statistics and make them interesting. And as I said, more people are interested in the absolute numbers than why they're changing.
So I'm going to show on the screen right now a sample of your last 3 weeks. We've got a market report and we've got a graph. I get that. Then the previous week, it's Greenwich, it's location, location, and FAR. Now, for people who don't know what FAR means, it's floor area ratio. And Greenwich and floor area ratio is a fancy way of saying volume. They measure the volume of the house in Greenwich versus in New Canaan and many of the other towns, they measure the footprint or how much of the ground the house covers. And then there's a height limit and setback limits. So, but FAR, I think, is unique to Greenwich. And this is a rather long and comprehensive explanation of what is FAR and how did Greenwich come to adopt FAR and what has been the result on Greenwich architecture over the last 20 years. And how is that need to be reformed as we move into the new era where affordable housing is taking center stage, et cetera, et cetera. I just want to show Roberto and our guests that this is a very long and comprehensive and deep dive on a really, really important subject, a subject that comes up every month at your P&Z meetings and our P&Z meetings, where people are asking for additional consideration, and having a masterful understanding of FAR or coverage is essential. And so you decided that was newsworthy and you gave us the deep dive. Is that what people want to see?
So a couple of things on that, and we'll give you a little inside baseball insight. So you're right, FAR is crucial in Greenwich, and it makes a lot of impact on the value of your house. So if your house can't be expanded, if it's already at its maximum for the floor area ratio, the value of that house is actually less because people can't add on to it as they want. So that's important to know. At the same time, there are all these nuances and loopholes and tricks that you can do with it. And people who are maxed out or want to go over are very interested in what these options are. Now, the inside baseball part is it gets searched a lot. So it's great for search engine optimization also. Also, if you'll see the date on that, that was written July 24th when a lot of people are away. So I use articles like that all the time. Somebody calls me up from Los Angeles, says, we're thinking about moving here. And I start talking about FAR and they go, what's that? And I go, are you in front of a computer? And I can take them right over there and show them all the details of that. And it's just a useful thing to have. That's different, that you wouldn't see in a normal report. But the folks here in Greenwich are actually, I'll get comments on that. I mean, somebody last week asked me, so I read your article and my garage isn't included, which I think means I can add another bedroom. Is that right? And I said, yeah, that's probably true.
Let me ask you something. In New York, Florida area ratio is still square footage. It's not volume. It's not like cubic feet. It's not. So John said volume. It's still square footage, right?
Yeah, it's the enclosed square footage. So first floor, second floor doesn't count on the basement unless it's walkout, and doesn't count in the attic if the attic is, even though it's finished, if it's less than 40%, and that's only the area under 7 feet. So you get into all these nuances, which the article talks about. We picked up FAR, which is mainly a commercial concept. You see that for office buildings and warehouses and things like that. But what was happening was people were in the 4-acre zone, which I think is unique to Greenwich. Even with the setbacks, you can build massive houses. And so with the floor area ratio, you're only 6% of the area of the lot to all the floors in the building. So you're looking on a 4-acre lot at 10,700 square feet maximum because of FAR, whereas a setback would probably allow you 24,000 square feet. You wouldn't think that would be a problem, and it usually isn't, but every once in a while, somebody says, hey, I'd love to live in 24,000 square feet and I have the money to do it. And FAR doesn't let them do that.
Now, Peter, at this point, you must be saying, okay, when are all the real estate geeks going to stop talking about FAR and 24% this and 6% that? I got newspapers to sell. Mark, give me some good hard-hitting analysis on the market. That's what the people want to see. Peter, what do the people want to see?
They want to see Mark's column. It's one of the most widely read columns in the paper. And, you know, Beth and I and others associated with the paper get people coming up to us and asking about it all the time. But I also do want to thank Mark, because those columns do take quite a bit of time. And when I've met with other real estate firms, you know, they've asked if they can write one. I've said, my response to them is always like, I'm sure Mark would like a week off here and there, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of work. It's also the greatest. It occurs to me, to be the most popular column, you have to be appealing to somebody other than people thinking about putting their house on the market and the 800 realtors. I mean, you've got a circulation of 20,000 people are looking at the Greenwich Sentinel every week, and there's only 800 realtors. So that means that less than 10% of your readership are actually in the business. And we've only
sold 330 houses this year. So right. Yeah, I mean, the idea is I try to make it a little more entertaining and kind of go along the lines of the Wall Street Journal has their lighter articles, which and I try to write in that style. I don't want to be too professorial. I tried using ChatGPT one time, and I got this article that sounded like it was written by a professor. And the idea is to make it interesting, and also to tell people, I've lived here since '67, to tell people stuff they don't necessarily know about Greenwich and their neighbors. So, you know, we write on a wide variety of things. The first week is a review of the previous month. The second week is a little more in depth. And then the third week, you know, we can write about anything. We write about negotiations. We write about, you know, what's selling and not selling. Well, as you can see, the FAR article was that one. And then the second one was kind of the in-depth dive. And then there's the July update. And then the one below there is the one that I mentioned that Carlene writes, usually the last week of the month.
And she gets a big picture of herself.
Yes, she doesn't do graphs, so I don't like the way I look as I'm getting grayer, so I'll go with the graph over the picture. And she's cuter than I am.
Do you have people suggesting, I'd love to hear about this, or I'd love to hear about that? Yeah,
like one of the, I was up, I live in backcountry Greenwich, North Greenwich, and which is the 4-acre zone. We're around the corner from where Leona Helmsley used to live. But in the northeast corner is this little area of 1/4-acre lots called Banksville, which has a retail section. And the people who live there love it. And I was at a Banksville community event, and even though I've lived there for 20 years, I'd never been to this. And so the people there were pushing me strongly to write an article about this little hidden gem of Greenwich, which I will do next month. So yeah, we get people all the time. I'm always asking people, what would you like me to write about? I wrote an April Fool's column one time, which got a lot of attention.
Yeah, indeed. Got a lot of phone calls to the office that week.
The way I wrote the article, and I could show you a picture of the Greenwich Khalifa that was funded by the Saudi Sovereign Fund. And there was this, it was a 100-story building on the town green behind town hall. And as I wrote the article, it got more and more ridiculous. So I got a couple of realtors who said, you know, I was really worried about this until I got down to about the 7th paragraph. And I said, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. And so a lot of people, I'm also on the Board of Assessment Appeals, and I wrote that from now on, if you want to appeal the property value of your house, you have to, here, let me, and I'll show you real quick. The
100-story affordable housing for downtown Greenwich.
So down here at the bottom, this is a Greenwich Town Hall, and this is the 100-story building under construction. This was all done with a an AI site that does images called DAL-E, and DAL-E, you know, did a nice rendering of town hall and the and that. So luckily, I think, given what Peter was saying, that picture didn't get in the paper because it was large. It got on my website. But yeah, the other thing I'd put in, as I said, was the Board of Assessment Appeals. Any appeal you make as to the value of your property will also be a put option, and anybody can buy your house at the price you think that it should be reduced to.
Peter, I got to ask,
Yes.
why print? I mean, everybody's been talking about the demise of print for a very long time. A lot of the towns in Fairfield County have lost their newspapers. Even some of the online sources like have tried, like the Patch, you know, they get big, they get small. Hamlet Hub, they get big, they get small. I mean, there's been a great deal of evolution of local news, but I don't see the return of print very often. So it strikes me, why is print important to you? And why are you starting with print on your new newspaper in New Canaan?
I think the opportunity to hold a paper in your hands for some people is important. And when we started this 8 years ago, we were doing research, and Warren Buffett was buying up local community newspapers across the country, seeing them as a good investment. Yes, you've seen a lot of the dailies get combined by a parent company. You know, I think there's a lack of local journalism. And I think when you are able to report on what's happening in the community, and you show that it's important enough to you, the publication, that you're going to put it in print, I think that gives it some gravitas. And it certainly has resonated here in Greenwich.
And that's definitely for an older demographic, right?
Actually, our main demographic are women between the ages of 35 and 65.
But are they the ones who are picking up the print?
They are both. Yes, overwhelmingly our subscriber base is female.
They want to hold the Vogue magazine and Vanity Fair magazines too. So those are the same women.
Can we talk about the economics a little bit? Let's just say you removed the print component. What would that reduce your costs by?
It would be a significant reduction.
So that's a major decision to do that.
Right. Paper costs money, ink costs money. It's printed up in Rhode Island. So it's got to get from Rhode Island down to here. And then our delivery people have to take it in the evening and distribute it to the subscribers.
Let's talk about what the alternatives. Here in New Canaan, we've had a newspaper, family owned, locally owned by the Hersom, called the New Canaan Advertiser for over 100 years. Recently, and when the Hersoms were running the paper, all the reporters, all the photographers, and the owner all lived in town. Within the last 10 years, the Hersoms sold the New Canaan Advertiser to the Hearst organization, and Hearst now runs the New Canaan Advertiser. And one of the significant changes is that I don't recognize any of the reporters as being local. They don't live here in the town. And a lot of the stories are now regional. And the other thing I noticed was the real estate section, which was where I started every week, has really sort of dried up. And maybe that was a phenomenon of COVID. Maybe it was happening before COVID, but a lot of the real estate companies stopped advertising in print. They certainly didn't rely on it to promote their new listings the way they did in the old days. So we still have a New Canaan Advertiser, but when the New Canaan Advertiser changed over the last few years, what did emerge exactly 10 years ago was the New Canaanite, and that's a daily blog, and it's online only. Now, I know that a lot of the towns like Wilton has a Good Morning Wilton, and it's also a daily blog. And so what do we have in Greenwich? What other sources of news in Greenwich, and how is the Greenwich Sentinel different from those other sources?
So in Greenwich, you've got the Greenwich Time, which is owned by Hearst. It's a daily publication.
Okay.
You also have a blog, much like the New Canaanite, called the Greenwich Free Press.
Okay.
And then there's a local radio station. Mark could probably speak to that a little bit more closely than I can. I don't know if you've talked to Gideon lately, Mark. But
that's WGCH AM. It just got bought out by by 4 local people.
Yeah.
And they're working on making it more interesting. We had a radio show on there talking about real estate. And now one of the things we're talking to them about is doing a video blog, because they have great sound equipment, as you might know, and they're thinking about adding video to their studios to kind of expand the radio station. So radio, I think, is even in a tougher situation than print. And I think what Peter and his wife have done is great, because they give you in one thing you can hold in your hand, as he said, pretty much everything you need to know. And because it's a weekly, it's not really, there aren't articles about the Ukraine and Hawaii and stuff like that. There are some great stories of people who grew up in here. There's history. There's just a variety of different interesting things that are worth reading on just about every page, which you don't always get when you, like, I get the Wall Street Journal at home, but I mostly read it online. But on the weekends, when I have time, there at least half of the articles I would be interested in, I never saw online, just because of the way the websites work.
I just want to correct 2 small points on what Mark just said. We have done an article on the Ukraine, and that is because the former Miss Connecticut is a Greenwich resident, and she's from Ukraine and has started a nonprofit to help foster a sister city in Ukraine with Greenwich.
But it was a Connecticut story about people who are influenced in the Ukraine, which no.
And we do have an article coming out in next week's Greenwich Sentinel about the Maui fires, because the American Red Cross Greenwich chapter of it has people there helping. And they just happened to be coming back from another disaster in Guam, and they landed in Hawaii the day before the wildfires occurred, and so stayed to help.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing about Greenwich. We have a lot of really interesting people. We have people who win Olympic medals. We have people who played in Super Bowls. We have people who do disaster relief in Hawaii. So all of these stories have a Greenwich angle, and it's one of those things that makes it just more interesting to live here. And they tell stories that otherwise you won't know about. And that's why I think in particular, the newspaper does well here, because A, they do a great job of writing it, and B, they do a great job of story selection to just kind of, so you can walk down, or your neighbor, maybe somebody that is working in Lahaina right now. And you might not have otherwise known that, but for the paper.
So Peter, you were going to differentiate between the others and yourself just a little bit more.
So do you mean like the Canaan Sentinel versus the Greenwich Sentinel?
Yeah.
So the New
No. Within Greenwich yourself, you said, John asked, what are the other news sources? And then we went to the radio station. I just want to come back to like, how is yours different? What is unique? And to further that, when you first started this endeavor, you had some sort of mission. I'm curious in the last 5 or so years, how that's kind of evolved and what's maybe changed, or also what surprised you about what's, how is it different from what you might have expected?
That's an excellent question. So as far as differentiating ourselves from the other media outlets, well, a blog and a newspaper, there's really no comparison. But with the Greenwich Time, the daily paper and the Greenwich Sentinel, we use the highest quality newsprint we can get, which happens to be white birch newsprint, which is actually headquartered here in Greenwich. But because it's really white, it's bright white, the ads pop off of it, the photos pop off of it, the sports photos from the Greenwich winning over Darien, the football championship last year, they pop off the page and people really respond to that. What has surprised me? I've been surprised constantly throughout this process by the desire for the community to have a paper and to be a part of it, to feel that they're a part of the newspaper community and be able to make suggestions and see them come to fruition. When we started the newspaper, we had a punch list of about 28 items that we wanted to get to, but we just didn't have the bandwidth when we started to get them all out in the first issue. And so I was taking a copy of the paper around to show to somebody, and they looked through it and they're like, no obituaries? I said, no, we want to start our obituaries. We just haven't gotten one yet. Do you have somebody in mind? I said, kind of jokingly. And she said, actually, my uncle just passed away, who started this very well-known local deli. And so we got the obituary, and then one of our editors called the family, put a little bit more a story into this person's obituary. And then when she asked how much we charge, we said we don't charge for obituaries. We believe this is the last time a person's name may ever be in print, and we want to honor that individual. And so we don't charge for obituaries, which is different.
I think what's interesting is that the newspaper used to be what's new on the market, and we relied on that. And once the average buyer had the internet tools to go search without the help of an agent, go search themselves on what's the inventory, I think that the newspaper had to evolve its role in the real estate business. And that's what I think is so fascinating to me about what Mark is doing. Mark is writing columns on what is selling in Greenwich and why. Well, I know that a couple of years ago, we did the revaluation in New Canaan, and all the condo owners were really angry at the fact that condos on average had appreciated 20% in a slow market. And they all sort of demanded a meeting down at town hall, and they wanted to talk to the assessor and say, why have our taxes gone up so much in a lousy real estate market? And I have to use that as an example that if we don't have these kind of long form conversations about real estate in the newspaper, where are we going to have them? That conversation doesn't take place on Instagram, and it certainly doesn't take place on TikTok. And Zillow doesn't provide that either. So if I don't have a Mark Pruner talking about the relative values of condos versus single family homes in my community, where else am I going to get it?
Yeah, and by the way, and so the reports I do monthly are about single family homes as opposed to the whole market, because the condo market and the rental market are very different. But 3 or 4 times a year, I'll write an article about how condos are doing. And it's very useful to have that as a resource when somebody wants to buy a condo, and it explains, because you're exactly right. I mean, in New Canaan, there's a real shortage of condos, and you have more demand, and it's a smaller town than Greenwich, but the demand for condos proportionally is greater than the demand for houses. So I'm not at all surprised that condos appreciated more. And the nice thing is with a little, some few Excel spreadsheets and some charts, you can show, pretty much why that is and when it happened and where it happened.
Roberta, where do you get your news in New York City regarding your neighborhood and real estate in particular?
I live on the Upper West Side, and there's something called the Upper West Side Rag, which they write about. There's every restaurant that's opening, every retail place that's closing, where crime happens, what's wrong with rats, what's wrong, it has everything. But most neighborhoods, not all, but most neighborhoods have something like the Tribeca Citizen or Bowery Boogie or Brooklyn, or, they have different things, and they've become very, very popular. It literally it gives you the news of what's happening within your neighborhood. And one of the things I found fascinating, which I would imagine to be the same thing for Peter, is that you have a lot of people that live in Palm Beach and live in, somewhere else, and they can just tap in and know what's happening in the neighborhood and in the town without having to be there while they're away for 2 or 3 months. They come back, they're in the know. And I find that, the same way when I was, during COVID and things like that, I was in Southampton quite a bit, but I get a feed from the West Side Rag, like every couple of days, it pops in, it tells me what's happening here, what's happening there, where the trouble is, where the, all that type of thing. And it's those micro places, those locations where you find, things about different neighborhoods. But also the other source for me is literally just calling brokers who specialize in certain neighborhoods. Literally.
John, if I can add that I mentioned it before, we want to deliver the news however people best want to receive it. So I focus a lot on the print edition because I love it, but we also have a very robust website where all of our content eventually gets to. We don't have a paywall. And we also, we have more followers on Facebook and our social media platforms than any other media outlet in town. And you can ask me about Instagram. I can't really talk to it because I don't handle that. But it's really, we also have an app where people can get the news through the app. So it keeps it interesting. There it is. Now we are on our annual 2-week summer hiatus this week and last week. So some of the content is not, I think our web person is out this week. So some of that content is just a little bit old.
How many people do you staff, not outside of writers and contributors and things like that? How many people do you staff?
Outside of writers and contributors, we have 4 or 5 people helping us out on an ongoing basis on the back end of various things.
So that's a lot. That's a lot to do.
We also have in Greenwich, we have something that's very popular. It's a daily email that goes out to the 22,000 people, but it's 5 things to do in Greenwich every day. And its average open rate is 43%.
Wow.
And we limit the number of ads that we can have on there. We don't want you to have to scroll through ad after ad after ad to get to content. So there's only a limit of 5 banner ads on that.
So just curious, you decided to go to New Canaan. How come you didn't go to Darien or one of the other towns?
We may yet. We had a couple people in New Canaan approach us about a year ago and say, would you guys ever consider coming here? And so we met with some people. I knew New Canaan very well when my uncle lived there, and he passed away about 10 years ago. So I have been spending time kind of re-engaging with people, meeting new people, figuring out the sort of the lay of the land and who the influencers are. We in the Greenwich Sentinel, we hope in the New Canaan Sentinel, we have a large number of community influencers who write regular columns for the paper. And so it's meeting those potential people and talking with them. And it's just been a lot of fun, and it's great. And I love the community. It's like how Greenwich was 30 years ago, I think.
Peter, how many writers do you have, and how many writers will be on the New Canaan staff, for example?
We've got about 12 writers all together. And we're still we're trying to find the right people for New Canaan. We want people in New Canaan writing about New Canaan, but we also want the right people writing. So we're just trying to find somebody that can represent New Canaan well, and also the Sentinel brand well. So if you know anybody, let me know.
Have you got anybody doing the insurance beat yet? I know somebody.
Why you brought that up?
How about Mark and I do do the open house list for
Yes.
the
you're
real
awesome,
estate
Pam.
sales.
Yeah, and by the way, we didn't talk, Pam Toner is here. And so there are 3 other things that regularly appear in the real estate section that get read very closely. One are the week's open houses, which Pam Toner and Rob Politano do, and the newspaper puts up. And then 2 are new listings and sales. And we do those, it shows the price, but the square footage, the acreage, the price per square foot, how long it was on the market and stuff like that. And those, I know, everybody reads those that's at all interested, even if it's only to scan down if they live in Coscob to see what's going on in Coscob.
I know we're getting a little bit away from the newspaper, which is the subject, but what is happening in the Greenwich market? Can you give us a little bit of a prediction? Is the Greenwich real estate market about to take off? Because I know you have so little inventory, and the prediction from Jonathan Miller was that prices are going to continue to rise in single family homes in Fairfield County. How about in Greenwich?
Yeah, no, it's flattened out. We had what we had was a lot of shadow inventory in 20 and 21. So in 21, for the first time ever, we broke 1,000 sales. Last year, and average is about 600 sales. Last year we were at 630. This year through July we're at 330. So we may not even break 600, but it's not for lack of demand. There are plenty of buyers for what we have out there. It's just we don't have a lot out there. The nice thing is, I think, based on the last 2 weeks, we're going to get more stuff in our fall market, which starts after Labor Day. We're certainly not going to get up to 500 listings where we are, but we're going to do significantly better than the 129 listings that we had this morning. And
how many listings did you guys have in 2019?
2019 at this time, we had, and it's funny, these are the quotes right out of the article. We had 624 listings at the end of July, and so we have, at the present time, we have 1 house on the market for every 4.5 houses that were on the market in 2019.
Oh my goodness.
See, that's exactly
Wow.
it. I think that's the whole point of the show right there. Every realtor in the world puts out a market report on social media on the number of sales with no analysis. But I just asked you, what's your analysis? And bang, you gave it to me. And you give it to us every week in the paper. And I think people are hungry for analysis.
Yeah, the biggest problem we've had is the story for the last 14 months has been inventory. And so I've now written 9 articles, maybe 12 articles about inventory, and tried to look at it from different ways. But it is just such a tight market with so few people putting their houses on the market. Now, 2 things to note. One, those numbers are only the numbers that are listed on the MLS. One thing that we don't have is a good source of information on private sales. We used to have a service that you could pay a lot of money for, and unfortunately they got out of the business. But probably maybe 1/4 to 1/3 of our sales are off market, whereas before it was only like 20%, back when we did have numbers. So it's not quite as dire as it looks, but it means that having someone who's clued in to what's like, I've got 2 people who called me solely because they think I can find them stuff that's off market because they don't like what's on the market.
What do you attribute the increase of those private sales, like the increase in proportionality? Is it because of the scarcity in itself?
Yeah. So you've got a couple of situations. Little old ladies are the classic example. I had a wonderful woman who lived over in Riverside. And she'd lived in this house for 45 years, and it looked like she'd cleaned it last time in 1970. And she had phlebitis. She didn't move very well. and she wasn't physically capable of doing it, nor did she have a lot of money to come in and have, this is probably $30,000 worth of work to make this house look showable. And you're still looking at a 1952 house that's only 1,800 square feet. So that was a perfect example of a private sale. We showed it privately to a few people. And the nice thing is when you do a private showing, the people know that it's not going to look perfect. And the developers are also very interested. And then the other thing that happens is, somebody will announce at an office meeting, next week I'll be putting on this $3.5 million property that's on the water at Old Greenwich. And for something like that, at that location, at that price point, the odds are 2 out of 3 somebody here in the office will have, and usually multiple people will have people that are looking for exactly that. And so that's, it's people can't find what they want on the market, and anytime they can get in there before others, they want to do it with the private listings.
Yeah.
Coming back to Peter's point about the importance of photographs and the importance of a fine quality paper and vibrant ink, I will say that when I want to promote something now, my go-to is to just put it up on Instagram. And I have to confess, Roberto, that I will make a beautiful, beautiful photograph of a house and I will put it up on Instagram and nobody cares. I'll get 225 views and I'll be like, man, I must be losing my touch. But my ability to break through consistently on Instagram on behalf of my clients and promote their houses is not enough. And so when Peter tells me that he's going to mail this newspaper to every household in New Canaan and that it's subscribed to by 6,000 people in Greenwich, I know that if I have a great new listing or I have just sold a great house and I want to get that story out to thousands of people, not 125, that this is probably, there's a great demand for what you're doing on behalf of advertisers. So can you address that? Talk about the value to advertisers of considering print again.
So 8 years ago, our very first advertiser was Patty DeFelice, who owns a business in Portchester called Patty's Portico. And we've known Patty for years. Her father had an auto body shop on Post Road, and just a really nice person. I went to her and I pitched the idea of doing advertising in the paper to her. She said, it's you, Peter. I'll do it for the summer. That's when most of my business comes in. She was in April through the summer. The fall, she's like, you know what? I get a new customer every week, at least from the ad. So let's keep it rolling. So she's been in 8 years consistently. And this, I think I have the timing right. This spring, or no, it was last winter, Martha Stewart went into her shop because somebody had shown Martha her ad in the Greenwich Sentinel.
Yeah,
so it works.
Patty, and of course, Patty puts up that Martha Stewart was here, and now her social media explodes because she's tagged Martha Stewart. So for Patty, her investment over 8 years is paying off quite well.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of our advertisers are long-term partnerships, and that's really how we view them. We don't view it transactionally because when we were starting out, we needed to be successful. So we needed to make sure our advertising partners needed to be successful. And we just developed that way. If people have ideas for a new way to communicate or promote their business or what have you, we're open to it. Somebody said to us 6 years ago, why don't you guys have an app and I'll advertise on the app? Now we have an app. So we listen to what our readers and people that are paying attention to us are saying, and we try to be responsive to that.
Are you profitable?
Yes. Thank you, but yes.
Yeah, one of the things.
Now, full disclosure, my mother has bought like 4 subscriptions each year we've been in business. She doesn't live anywhere in our delivery area.
Yeah.
She does it just to be supportive, but no, we are profitable now. Yes.
Yeah, but different people like different media.
Yes.
And just as Peter said about Martha Stewart, there was a woman who read something and knew her and mentioned it to her. And the one of the other problems with social media is we had some folks come in and give our group a presentation on how to use social media. They said the useful life for a post on Facebook is 17 minutes. After 17 minutes, for anybody who's a regular user, that is so far down in their timeline that they're never going to see it. Whereas the great thing about a print ad is whenever you pick up the newspaper, it's there. And you also get the repetition that, you know, happens from seeing it every week.
So
Peter, what other sections? What other sections are? I mean, I can imagine the real estate section is wildly popular.
yes.
What other section? Like, what's next? Is it food? What's after that? What's after that?
All right. So that's a great question. Let me see here. I'm just looking at the screen that John put up. So I think after the real estate, it's a tie, really, and it's a tie between the worship pages they seem to be very popular here in Greenwich, but it's also a tie between part of our second section, which you can't see up here online, but it's puzzles, Sudoku, crossword puzzle, horoscope, Calvin and Hobbes cartoon. You know, it's interactive. It's stuff that grandparents can do with grandkids, parents can do with their children. I'm told that you know, several grandparents send it to their kids that are across the country and do it with them online or do it with them on the phone. We started a really cool feature about 6 or 7 weeks ago. It's a contest. The New Yorker magazine used to have a writing contest every month, and it went on for like 30 years. And it was the editor would offer up a prompt and encourage people to write in responses to it. The prompt could be something like how you're introduced at a cocktail party, how you wished you were introduced at a cocktail party. And we get some really clever responses, and whoever wins, and it's judged by the person who's supporting this, whoever wins gets a $50 check either made out to themselves or a nonprofit that they like. And so it's interacting with the paper on different levels that I think is really enjoyable for a lot of people.
That's great.
Yeah, it's really more, it's the calling things a newspaper, because there are several publications that have done what the Greenwich Sentinel does, I think is inaccurate. It's a local media or local information source. And they do cover planning and zoning, and they do cover highways and restaurant openings and stuff like that. But it's, you know, opinions from people who are kind of thought leaders in the community that make you think, and it's puzzles. And by the way, thank you for the cartoons. I always like those. It's the first thing I read in the Greenwich Time on Sunday. But yeah, and the other thing is, they do it very smartly because, as you heard, they've got an app, they've got a website, they've got a Facebook page. So they go where you are. But for many people, reading the paper is just the most efficient way to, because I can flip through the paper and I know what's going on. And because it's a weekly, it's a summary. Whereas in the daily paper, it's pretty much the increment from the day before. And that may not be much change from what happened before.
Exactly. So we're excited. We're launching next Friday, August 25th. We're going to be going to every household in town for the first few weeks. And we've already had, I think we are up to 47 subscribers at this point. And I just saw 2 emails come in about advertising while we've been on this call. So we're excited.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're in our final minute. I want to thank you, Roberto, my co-host. Excellent job as always. Mark Pruner, the most interesting man in Greenwich real estate.
That's a low bar.
And Peter Barhydt, the media king of Greenwich, now moving to New Canaan. And I wish you every success in New Canaan.
Thank you very much. And
Thank you, John. Thank you, Roberta.
Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it.
Great show. And what do we have coming up, Roberto? We're going to be doing Sydney, Australia. We're going to be doing We're going to be we're back out in LA or I guess in Orange County coming up. And I think we're trying to put something together in Fairfield, Connecticut, right, Pam?
Yep.
So we're all over the country coming up. All right.
All over
Thanks,
the world,
everybody.
Sydney.
Another great show. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye now.
All clear. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks.